everyone, welcome back to Feather Stitch House. My name's Rebecca and each week on this channel I make videos about embroidery and textile art to help you get creative. Today we're going on another patchwork adventure and we're going to look at a really simple block that is really useful for teaching some key techniques for patchwork quilting. We're going to work on a 9 patch. Now this is really simple. It's going to come together quite quickly, but it's a really useful block for teaching some of the key techniques for nesting seams and for cutting pieces. And I'll also go through a little bit about how to adapt this block and how to make sure your measurements are right depending on what size finished block you want to achieve. So you're going to need some fabric scraps, some polyester or cotton sewing thread, a piece of backing fabric if you're using it, and a pair of scissors. And if you've got a rotary cutter and cutting mat, that will be handy, but you can just draw lines with a heat erase pen or pencil and cut with scissors if you want to. So gather all your bits and pieces and let's get stitching. Well, welcome back to another patchwork adventure video. Today I thought we'd do another fairly simple piece that is all about cutting. So we've been working with strips in the last couple of videos. This is kind of a similar principle, but we're going to have a little bit of a play. So I've got my backing piece. This is a 7-inch square and my finished block is actually going to be 6 inches, but because I'm adding pieces onto this, I just want some space to trim back and have a seam allowance to join them all together ultimately. I've also got some more of my Liberty Tana Lawn, and this is a good one for small scraps. So I'm just going to move this to one side for the time being and explain what I've got here. So I've got 6 different patterns of Tana Lawn. I know this is Strawberry Thief. I don't know what the others are. This one's Wiltshire. I don't know what the others are. I will find out and put them in the description below, but this is what we're working with at the moment. So I've got 3 pieces here that are 2 3/4 inches wide and 5.5 inches long. So I've got 3 of those, and these are going to make 2 rows of squares for my 9 patch. And then I've got these 3 other pieces that are 2 3/4 inches square. So my finished squares are going to be just over 2 inches, 2 1/4 inches thereabouts, and that's going to fill my block really nicely. So I'm going to put these little ones to the side for the time being, and what I want to do is mark some seam allowances on these pieces. So I'm going to just turn them over first of all, like that, and I need my quilting ruler that's got inch markers on it, and I'm going to just mark a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the left and right edges of each of these pieces. Now I'm using a heat erase pen. You can do this with pencil. Either way your lines won't show. If you use pencil when you first wash your quilt after you've made it, all that pencil will wash away. And with heat erase pen, when you press your seams open, they'll all disappear that way as well. So either way you won't have any lines showing, so don't worry too much about drawing on your fabric. You can use like an air erase pen, but I find that when I'm hand sewing the pen disappears before I'm ready. Okay, so I'm just going to flip those the right way over, and we're going to have 2 strips that are similar and then a strip in the middle that's different. And I've gone for all the sort of reds that I've got, so this is going to be a predominantly red patch. So what I want to do is flip my right hand piece over like a book closing onto my centre piece, and I'm going to pin these pieces together. And what I want to do is make sure that my pin is matching that seam allowance line on the back and on the front, and taking some time to get this matched up correctly will save you ages later, because if you are confident that your lines are matching, you won't have to keep checking when you're sewing them together. So through on the front, check that my pin's on the line on the back, and then I can rock the pin through to hold it in place. You can use quilting clips for this if you want to. I find them quite heavy while I'm working on small pieces like this, and so I prefer a pin. I know a lot of people don't like puncturing the fabric, but you're going to puncture it anyway when you sew. So I don't have tons of Tana Lawn, don't have tons of any Liberty fabric in my stash, which is why I'm using it for our patchwork pieces, because I've got lots of small pieces and I think they'll all look really nice when they're pulled together at the end. Okay, so I've got some polyester Gutterman thread here. This is just a normal sewing thread, that's the code if you're interested in it, and that's what I'm going to use to sew. I've got a sharps needle here, so it's got a small eye, sharp point, and I've got no idea what size it is, because if you've been around for a while you'll know I'm not that fussy about needles. I'm guessing it's about a size 10, could be wrong. So I've got a quilter's knot at the end of my thread, and I'm going to come up on my line just in from the edge of the fabric. That's quite a long tail on there, so I'm just going to snip it off. And I'm going to start with a little back stitch. So I'm going to back stitch first of all. So I've come up back to front so that I can do a back stitch, and I'm going to bring my needle back up where it first came through the fabric, and that's my sort of locking stitch. So I've got a knot in the thread, but now I've got a stitch that's going to help keep that really nice and secure as well. And then all I'm going to do is make a tiny running stitch on that line, and I can do it by rocking the fabric back and forth to load up some stitches onto my needle. You want these stitches to be as small as you can get them. Just going to move my pin along a little bit. So working on the line, and if you've matched your lines up correctly, it will match on the back as well. So I'll just check that. Yes, I'm dead on the line. I don't know if you can see that. There we go. I'm dead on the line on the back, so that shows how worthwhile it is taking some time to match those pins up. Every 4 or 5 stitches or so, I'm just going to do a little back stitch, just as a locking stitch, and there's 2 reasons for that. One is that it just makes your stitching that little bit more secure, but it also interrupts the running stitch so that you don't end up gathering. Running stitches, if you pull too tight, will gather and pucker the fabric, and you really don't want that. You want your stitches to be sitting flat, and if you every now and again put a little back stitch in, it interrupts the run of stitches and will limit how much gathering can happen on your fabric. If you're worried that you're pulling too tight, every now and again you just want to smooth back along the fabric like that. Now, I got a ton of comments on my last patchwork video, which was a 3-panel patch or the rail fence block, where people just cannot understand why I'm hand sewing this when a machine would be so much quicker and easier. So I thought while I'm sewing I could answer that question. I have got a sewing machine. I have quilted using a sewing machine, and I have actually made a 3-panel patch or a rail fence quilt using a sewing machine, and it was great. I rustled it up in less than a week and was really happy with it. I machined all of it except the back of the binding, which I hand stitched. But sometimes I really love that, and sometimes I just want to hold the fabric in my hand and hand sew. I just love hand sewing. I love how therapeutic it is. I love how mindful it is. And I love the slowness of it. I actually relish the slowness of it. And I think there's a lot to be said for rustling up a quilt quite quickly and machining it. And I know that there are like jelly roll races and things like that. And there's so much fun to be had with machine sewing and chain piecing and all the things that quilters do. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. Go for your life. And if you want to machine this, of course you can. But I think sometimes it's nice to have a project that just takes time, that is really slow, that will come together gradually in its own time. And the project is more about the action of sewing than it is about finishing it. And one day I'll have a lovely quilt made out of Liberty scraps. But I'm not in any hurry, because actually what I want to do is enjoy the process of learning the different blocks, trial and error, learning how to sew by hand. And I also want to show that you don't have to have a sewing machine to be able to do patchwork quilting, because years ago it was all done by hand. And so there's something to be said for going back to the old ways of doing things, and I just find it really therapeutic. So you can make this patch on a machine, that's absolutely fine. You can learn the principles and go and rustle it up really quickly, but I'm choosing to do it by hand because I just like the therapeutic quality of it. So I hope that answers that question. I'm not doing it by hand because I'm a sewing snob or because I think there's something wrong with machining. I just really enjoy it. So that's all. So I've finger pressed that seam so that the fabric can stay flat, and now I'm going to do the same on the other side and fold it in so that they're right sides together. And I'm going to repeat that process again. So matching up my seam allowance lines, that's gone through perfectly first time. I love it when that happens. So you find the line on the front, make sure on the back that the pin has come through on the line, and then just rock it along the line to hold those pieces together. So we're sewing them right sides together, and I do the sort of book fold at the start just so that I'm sure that my fabrics are heading in the right direction. And I'm just going to do the same process again. So this block is super easy and you can vary it. So I'm doing a 9 patch, but you could do a 12 patch, you could do a 15 patch, you could do a 4 patch if you wanted to, and it's not actually that difficult to adapt. You just need some very, very simple mathematics, and when I say simple, I really do mean simple. So let's take a 6-inch block as an example. To make a 9 patch, you need to divide the size of your finished block by 3, because we're going to have 3 squares by 3 squares on our block. And so 6 divided by 3 is 2 inches. So what you want is your finished square patches to be 2 inches square, and that will give you a finished block size of 6 inches. But it's really important that you don't cut your strips to 2 inches, because you've also got to factor in that there will be a seam allowance. So if you cut your strips to 2 inches, you're going to lose a 1/4 inch on each side to the seams, and that will mean that your squares end up at 1.5 inches and your block won't be big enough. So what you need to do is divide your finished block size by 3 and add 1/2 inch to that number. So if you want a finished block size of 6 inches, we want 2 inches plus a 1/2 inch. So that's 2.5 inches, and that's the size to cut your strips to. If I wanted a 12 square patch on a 6-inch block, what I would do is cut each strip to 2 inches, because 2 inches minus 1/2 inch is 1.5. 1.5 times 4 is 6, and so that will give me 4 rows. And if you wanted to do 4 like that, you could do it all in one go. Cut your strip into 4. So you'd do your strips 2 inches wide and 8 inches long, and you'd sew 4 strips together and then cut them at 2-inch intervals. So you cut that long 8-inch strip into 4, and then all you would need to do is rotate every other one, and so I'll show you. So I've got my 3 pieces attached together, they're nice and secure. So now I want to press it, and I've got a lighter piece in the centre, and so I want my seams to be pressed outwards to the darker fabrics. So I've got my iron here. I'm just going to pull ever so gently on that fabric to the left, just to make sure the seam is opened up, and then I'm going to flip it and do the same on the other side. I'm not going right to the edge because I don't want to erase my seam allowance lines on the outside. I just flip it over, and I always press from the front as well, just to make sure those seams are really super flat. I'm going to bring in my cutting mat again, so I just want to show you how this works. So I'm going to line up the edge of my strip. It's no longer a multiple of 2 3/4 inches, it's now 7 inches. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So it's now reduced to 7 inches, which is the size of my backing block, and that's going to give me some cutting room and a seam allowance around the outside. So what I want to do now is split this in half. So I want to count 2 3/4 inches from the left or the right, it doesn't matter, because it's going to cut in half exactly. So always double check 1 2 3/4, and I'm just going to cut along that strip, and that's going to make 2 3 patches now. Now you'll notice that these are not square. Don't panic, because there will be. We've still got to take our vertical seam allowances away. If I was doing a 12 square patch, what I would do is I'd have 4 of these, and every second one I could flip. Now you can't do it with a 3 patch because the centres won't change, but if you've got 4, let's show you with this. If you've got 4, when you turn it around, everything offsets and you get a different arrangement. So you could do it with a 4, but you can't do it with 3 because that centre block doesn't change, and so you don't get the variety you want. So this is going to be my top and bottom section. So I'm going to start off by marking in 1/4 inch seam allowances on the top and bottom of each of those strips. So all I'm doing is lining up that 1/4 inch marker line with the edge of the block, and I'm just taking extra care when I'm going over those seams, because otherwise you end up distorting everything because your pen will catch on the fold of the seam. But I just want to explain what I'm doing here. So with these 3 extra fabrics, you might want to choose a correct way up. Sometimes it doesn't matter, sometimes it does. So I want my bird the right way up. This one's going to be my centre one, so I'm going to flip that over. I need to mark the seam allowances in again. Flip that over and pin it, and then stitch my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to flip that one over, stitch it, and then press the seam allowances open. So I'm going to join this strip together, and then I'll come back and show you how we attach it all together into one piece.
What do you think's going on there? What do you...
Okay, so this time I have put the darkest fabric in the centre, and so I want to press my seams in. So just pulling slightly over to make sure the seams open up, press from the back, and now I'm going to press from the front. And just like before, I want to put my seam allowance lines in along the top and bottom edge, and that will leave us all set up to join all of the blocks together. So you can either leave your top block the same, top and bottom, or you can flip it if you want to. What do I want to do? I think I'm going to flip it. So we flipped our pieces so that they're next to each other, and what I want to do is match up these corners, and this is the way we're going to get our points to match. So I'm going to pop my needle through on the intersection between that seam line and the stitch line. So I'm going to find the corner point, and then I want to find exactly the same point on my next piece. So keeping them right size together, just want to make sure my pin goes through, and then I'm going to do the same on the other seam. So this is going to make sure we've got perfect corners on. Perfect meeting points on our block. So I'm pushing the pins all the way through first of all, and I just want to give that a bit of a shake so that everything lines up, and then I can rock my pin to the side, and hopefully you can see that that pin is sitting on the seam allowance line almost exactly. So again, I'm going to rock the pin and again it's sitting perfectly on the seam allowance line. I can put in another pin if I want to, just to make sure that the seam allowances before that first join point are perfect. And what you should notice here is that on my top strip the seams are pressed out, and on my next strip the seams are pressed in, so when we open those out they're going to nest together really nicely. So I'll show you that when we get there. I've got a knot in the end of my thread, and I'm just going to do exactly the same process again and stitch these together. So that's the two joined together, and if I just fold that back on the back, you'll see that those seams sit really nice and flat because they've nested, because we've got one seam going one way and the other going the other. So I can press that open again, try not to erase my other seam line, and that's the way it's looking so far. So now I can put my final strip on. I'm going to fold it up and repeat the process again. So that's our finished patch, and you can see how the centre square is now properly square, and if we took away our seam allowances top and bottom, we'll end up with squares all the way around. So I'm going to bring back in my backing piece. I do love the way it looks. Just love it. And I'm going to pin it on. So when we join this to other blocks, we'll end up with a perfect 9 patch with 9 squares. And just to show you how that little pin trick works, if I bring it up close, you should be able to see that our corners are matched absolutely perfectly there. So I'm going to just use some dark thread to tack it onto my backing piece. I'm not going to worry about quilting it because when I put this together into a full quilt, I'll quilt along all the joins anyway. So as long as I'm within my 1/4 inch seam allowance around the edge, I won't even have to take out these tacking stitches. So there it is, a 9 patch made of little strips stitched together, nested seams on the back, and all done with Liberty Tana Lawn in lovely red shades. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope that's helped you understand how to match corners and how to create a panel that works really nicely and sits nice and flat, and I hope that you will have a go with some fabric scraps of your own. So thanks so much for watching, happy stitching, and I will see you again soon in another video. Take care, bye.